strong trading volumes and institutional activity as the network prepares for a major infrastructure.
If you hold XLM right now, the biggest danger isn't price going down. It's misunderstanding what phase you're actually in. That's the warning. After the video we just watched, there's a quiet assumption many XLM holders are making without realizing it. The assumption is simple and dangerous. If the fundamentals are strong, price will eventually reward me automatically. That belief is comforting. It's also incomplete. XLM is not a hype asset. It never has been. And that is both its strength and its trap.
Inception. Stellar has an awesome payments network and a really robust practice with respect to being able to send and receive value very inexpensively, securely. And there are over 15 billion operations on the network. But there wasn't a smart contract platform. So there wasn't this space where developers could come and just sort of build what they wanted to build and how they wanted to build it. And so we really wanted to create that greenfield space for builders to be able to do that. And so we did that.
The warning for XLM holders is not that Stellar is failing. The warning is that Stellar is transitioning, and transitions punish the wrong expectations. Let's talk about why this matters. XLM was designed to be efficient, low-cost, compliant, and invisible. Invisible is the key word most people ignore. Stellar's goal was never to be loud. It was to be used. And here's where things get uncomfortable. Assets that aim to be used don't move the way assets that aim to be admired do. They don't reward attention. They don't respond to narratives. They don't care about sentiment. They reprice only when usage reaches a level where price can no longer stay disconnected. That creates a psychological danger zone for holders. Because while you're waiting, something subtle happens. You start anchoring your confidence to future certainty instead of present signals. You tell yourself, it's inevitable, without defining what inevitability actually looks like. That's how people stay early for too long. And being early without clarity feels exactly like being wrong. Here's the first major warning. XLM does not owe you a timeline. This isn't Bitcoin. It isn't a meme coin. It isn't driven by speculation cycles. XLM moves when payment rails demand it, not when holders want validation. That means long stretches of nothing. Not decline, not collapse, nothing. And nothing is emotionally exhausting. Many XLM holders confuse patience with passivity. They wait without checking whether the conditions they're waiting for are actually forming. That's dangerous. The second warning is more uncomfortable. XLM can succeed without making holders rich quickly. Let that sit for a second. Stellar can be widely used, deeply integrated, and operationally successful while price remains underwhelming for longer than most people expect. Why? Because infrastructure prioritizes stability over speculation. If a system is meant to move value cheaply and reliably, excessive volatility is a problem, not a feature. That doesn't mean price never moves. It means price moves late. And late moves feel unfair to those who endured the boring years without a plan. This is where many XLM holders silently crack. They don't rage quit. They don't announce it. They just slowly lose conviction. They stop paying attention. They stop learning. They stop refining their thesis. Then when repricing finally begins, they're emotionally detached or underpositioned. That's not bad luck. That's fatigue. The third warning is about comparison. Watching other assets move faster is poison for XLM holders. Because Stellar is not competing for attention. It's competing for integration. Comparing it to hype-driven assets will always make it look weak in the short term. And short-term weakness creates long-term mistakes. People rotate out of XLM chasing excitement, only to rotate back after the excitement collapses. That cycle drains capital and confidence. The market doesn't punish bad assets the most. It punishes misaligned expectations. Here's the core warning, and it's the one most people won't say out loud. If you hold XLM for emotional validation, you will eventually resent it. If you hold XLM with a clear understanding of its role, signals, and constraints, boredom won't shake you. This is not about telling you to buy, sell, or hold blindly. It's about telling you to get honest. Ask yourself, do I know what would confirm my thesis? Do I know what would invalidate it? Or am I just waiting because I've already waited this long? Hope is not a strategy. Understanding is. The market is entering a phase where XLM's success may become obvious operationally long before it becomes obvious financially. That gap is where most holders fail. Not because they were wrong, but because they didn't adjust their mindset to the asset they chose. In this video, we're going to break down the exact mistakes XLM holders make during infrastructure transitions, how to avoid getting emotionally drained, and how to stay positioned without blindly waiting. Because the real warning for XLM holders isn't about price. It's about losing clarity right before clarity matters most. Let's go deeper because this is where the real damage happens for XLM holders, and it has nothing to do with charts. It happens internally, silently. The biggest mistake XLM holders make during infrastructure transitions is holding the right asset with the wrong mental framework. Stellar was never built to behave like a retail darling, yet many holders subconsciously expect it to reward them like one. That mismatch slowly erodes conviction. Here's mistake number 1, and it's subtle. Confusing long-term vision with blind waiting. Many XLM holders say, "I'm in this for the long term," but they never define what long-term progress actually looks like. So every month that passes without price movement feels like failure, even if nothing is actually wrong. Long-term thinking without benchmarks becomes emotional gambling. You're not waiting with intention. You're waiting with hope. And hope gets exhausted. Infrastructure assets demand conditional patience, not infinite patience. That means you should know what developments matter and which ones don't. If you don't, every delay feels personal. That's how people end up saying things like, "Maybe Stellar just isn't respected," or "Maybe the market doesn't care." The market doesn't care about feelings. Cares about functionality. Mistake number 2 is mistaking silence for stagnation. Stellar does not market itself aggressively. It doesn't rely on hype cycles. It doesn't amplify narratives to keep holders emotionally engaged. That creates a dangerous illusion. When you don't see noise, you assume nothing is happening. But silence in infrastructure is often a sign of seriousness. Payment rails don't need to announce every test. Integrations don't need to be tweeted. Compliance alignment doesn't trend. XLM holders who need constant updates to maintain belief are fighting the design philosophy of the asset they chose. That internal conflict is draining. Mistake number 3 is benchmarking XLM against the wrong competitors. XLM is not competing with meme coins. It's not competing with hype-driven layer ones. It's not competing with speculative narratives. It's competing with legacy payment systems. SWIFT, correspondent banking, slow, expensive, multi-day settlement. Those systems don't move fast, and neither does their replacement. When you compare XLM to assets designed for attention rather than integration, you will always feel disappointed. And disappointment leads to reactive decisions. This is how people rotate out of XLM at the worst possible time. Not because something broke, but because boredom convinced them nothing was building. Mistake number 4 is overexposure during a patience-heavy phase. This one is dangerous and rarely discussed. Holding too much of an infrastructure asset too early creates psychological pressure. You start needing it to work soon, not because the thesis demands it, but because your emotions do. That pressure distorts judgment. You check price too often. You interpret neutral news as negative. You look for confirmation everywhere. That's not strategy. That's stress. Smart positioning allows for waiting without emotional exhaustion. If your position size makes patience painful, the problem isn't the asset. It's the sizing. Mistake number 5 is identity attachment. Some XLM holders don't just hold the asset. They identify with it. They defend it online. They argue narratives. They internalize criticism. That's a trap. Infrastructure assets do not need defending. They need time. When your identity becomes tied to an asset, every delay feels like an attack. That emotional weight pushes people to irrational exits or stubborn denial. Neither ends well. Now here's the most important part of this section. Stellar's success path is not binary. It does not go from ignored to moon. It goes from ignored to relied upon to normalized. And normalization is the most dangerous phase for impatient holders. Because when something becomes normal, it stops being exciting before it becomes valuable. That middle phase is where most people give up. Not because the asset failed, but because it stopped entertaining them. This is the phase XLM is moving through. The market is slowly deciding whether Stellar belongs in the background of global payments. Background assets are invisible until they break. And when they don't break, no one applauds. They just keep using them. That's the uncomfortable truth XLM holders must accept. If you are holding XLM expecting emotional validation, excitement, or social recognition, this asset will eventually punish you psychologically. If you are holding XLM because you understand its role, constraints, and adoption curve, boredom will not scare you. This is not about blind loyalty. It's about alignment. Alignment between the asset's purpose and your expectations. If those two don't match, no amount of fundamentals will save you from frustration. Next, we're going to talk about how XLM holders can stay positioned without burning out, what signals actually matter during this phase, and how to avoid being early in a way that costs you belief. Because the real risk isn't price going to zero. It's losing conviction right before conviction becomes valuable. Now we reach the most critical part for XLM holders. How to stay positioned without losing conviction during this tricky phase. This is where knowledge and strategy separate those who survive from those who burn out. The first thing to understand is that XLM is in an infrastructure phase, not a speculation phase. That distinction changes everything. In speculation, signals are loud, emotional, and obvious. In infrastructure, signals are subtle, quiet, and often invisible to retail participants. That's why most XLM holders feel anxious. The market appears boring when in reality, structural work is happening beneath the surface. Let's start with the most fundamental principle: patience with purpose. Patience is not just waiting. Waiting without a framework is emotional gambling. Purposeful patience means defining what progress actually looks like, what confirmation signals matter, and what would invalidate your thesis. Without this, every sideways week feels like a setback. With it, every sideways week becomes an opportunity to observe the system and refine your understanding. So, what does purposeful patience look like for XLM? Signal 1. Transactional growth independent of price. One of the most overlooked signs is usage. Stellar is designed to move value efficiently. When you see networks being used, whether in remittance corridors, corporate integrations, or tokenized asset settlements, without price reacting, that's a green flag. It means adoption is real, not hype-driven. Holders who focus solely on price often miss this, feeling that nothing is happening when in fact the network is quietly being absorbed into real-world operations. Signal 2. Regulatory and compliance clarity. Infrastructure assets live and die by compliance. XLM's utility depends on being legally operable across borders. When regulatory updates are neutral to positive, even quietly, it signals that adoption hurdles are clearing. This isn't exciting news, but it is critical. Ignore it at your peril. Signal 3. Enterprise adoption without fanfare. Unlike hype-driven tokens, Stellar isn't marketed for mass retail. Enterprises integrate quietly. Pilots are conducted internally. Back-end testing happens without press releases. This is exactly the type of adoption that makes a system reliable. If you are watching only headlines and social media for progress, you will underestimate XLM's positioning. Signal 4. Market resilience in volatile conditions. During system-level transitions, infrastructure assets behave differently. They resist both extremes. They don't pump irrationally, nor do they crash dramatically. That stability is intentional. It reflects institutional accumulation and careful supply management. Retail often misreads calm as stagnation, triggering unnecessary panic. Signal 5. Correlation divergence. Pay attention to how XLM moves relative to other cryptocurrencies. Infrastructure assets often decouple from hype-driven cycles. When broader markets surge or crash, XLM may move differently. That divergence indicates that capital is treating it as something other than speculation. It's being positioned as a utility, not entertainment. Understanding these signals helps mitigate the two main psychological dangers for XLM holders: impatience and comparison. Impatience arises from expecting fast results. The solution is to anchor your expectations to the right signals. Ask yourself, are real-world integrations growing, even if price is static? Is regulatory clarity improving? Are institutions quietly adopting XLM? If yes, then patience is productive, not passive. Comparison is equally dangerous. Retail constantly benchmarks XLM against faster-moving or hype-driven assets. This is a trap. Stellar's goal is not to chase pumps. Its goal is to integrate into real-world financial systems. Comparing it to speculative assets leads to frustration, rotation, and missed positioning. Now, let's address positioning strategy. XLM holders must balance mental resilience with financial exposure. Too much exposure in a boring phase creates stress, which leads to impulsive decisions. Too little exposure reduces the eventual benefit when adoption finally triggers repricing. The key is manageable allocation that allows you to remain calm and strategic, not emotionally reactive. Another crucial point is identity separation. Some holders attach their ego to XLM, defending it on social media or internalizing criticism. That creates emotional volatility. Instead, focus on objective observation. Evaluate adoption, usage, regulatory progress, and enterprise integration. Your belief should stem from facts and signals, not sentiment. Holders must understand the time lag between infrastructure success and price recognition. Stellar can succeed operationally for years before price catches up. Early adopters who survive this phase do so because they accept that calm, boring progress is a necessary precursor to repricing. Most holders fail not because the asset fails, but because they burn out emotionally while waiting for price to reflect operational reality. XLM holders must adopt a framework of purposeful patience, signal-focused observation, emotional discipline, and strategic exposure. By doing this, you position yourself to endure the quiet years, stay aligned with adoption trends, and be ready when XLM's operational relevance finally translates into price movement. Finally, we will discuss how to act without panic, the exact behaviors to avoid, and how to turn patient alignment into actionable positioning, without letting boredom or noise erode your conviction. Here's how it all comes together, and why this is critical for XLM holders. If you've followed the previous analysis, you know the danger isn't that Stellar will fail. The danger is losing clarity and conviction during the quiet, invisible years. That's when holders make the costly mistakes. Rotating out of XLM because price seems flat, comparing it to hype assets, or letting emotions dictate decisions. That's the phase most people don't survive, and the phase that precedes repricing. So what do you do now? First, you accept the rhythm of infrastructure assets. XLM doesn't move for entertainment. It moves because systems adopt it. That means much of the progress will be invisible to retail. Transaction growth, back-end enterprise integration, compliance milestones. None of these are headline-grabbing, yet all are critical. Holders who learn to watch signals, not price, gain an edge. Second, define your confirmation signals clearly. Ask yourself, what would validate my thesis about XLM? What would invalidate it? If Stellar achieves integration into a new payment corridor, or regulatory clarity is achieved in a major jurisdiction, that's progress. If adoption slows or key partnerships fail, that's your alert. By having these criteria in advance, you avoid the emotional whiplash that kills conviction. Third, position size for patience. Too much exposure creates stress, which forces bad decisions. Too little exposure leaves you underprepared when repricing finally arrives. Allocate amounts you can comfortably hold through sideways or slow-moving periods without panicking or second-guessing. Mental endurance is just as important as capital allocation. Fourth, detach ego and identity from XLM. This isn't a statement about loyalty or personal validation. Treat Stellar as a system asset, not a badge of honor. Infrastructure rewards the calm, not the loud. Avoid online arguments, emotional reactions to market noise, and comparisons with meme-driven assets. Observing objectively keeps you aligned with reality, not sentiment. Finally, embrace the gap between operational success and price recognition. Stellar can be used extensively in the background of global payments while price lags. That lag feels frustrating, but it's normal for system-level assets. Recognizing it early prevents emotional exits and preserves your positioning. Remember, the market rewards alignment with adoption, not alignment with excitement. The key takeaway is simple. XLM holders succeed when they understand the nature of the asset, the signals that matter, and the patience required. Misalignment between expectation and reality is the biggest threat, not market moves. By observing quietly, positioning strategically, and focusing on operational developments rather than headlines, you place yourself ahead of most participants who will burn out before the repricing even begins. If this breakdown helped you see XLM differently, here's what to do next. Like this video to help others cut through the noise and understand the system-level signals that matter. Subscribe for ongoing analysis that prioritizes infrastructure, adoption, and patient positioning over hype-driven speculation. And comment below with one word describing how you're approaching XLM right now. Curious, cautious, patient, or confident. Sharing your perspective helps the community stay aligned while the quiet shift unfolds. Because in the end, surviving the calm is what positions you to profit when the market finally recognizes Stellar's real-world value.